Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of Progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today, and I want you to meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. More and more of you are joining. Thank you so much. We get so much traction on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. They called me, they reach out when you get a lot of traction, and they wanted me to ask you to come over to the YouTube channel. But you can stay on Facebook if you like, but please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Like me and become my friend there. And of course, meet me on Twitter at Santita J. Or is it X now? I can never keep these things straight. At Santita J, of course. And then, of course, please like and subscribe me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Click that bell so that when we go live, you will be notified. And of course, I share it with, I think his name is Reverend Jesse Jackson. I share it on his page too. But we got a lot to talk about today. In this first hour, we're going to be looking at Blac prosecutors, progressive prosecutors all across the country. They're on the ballot in 2024. For many of you who might be dispirited or despairing of voting, well, guess what? You might be stuck on the presidential election, but these people impact how we live. And they vote, we vote for them, we put them into office. But the Blac prosecutors, the progressive prosecutors, they're not necessarily one and the same. They are under fire. Kim Fox in Illinois, in Cook County here in Chicago, she said, I'm not going to run anymore. I am done. And boy, she has been under fire ever since she walked into office. Marilyn Mosby. We're going to talk about her case specifically today. Letitia James, you just keep on going. It's they are in the crosshairs, and we've got to talk about that. In the second hour, we will be looking at the crackdowns on the student protests that are occurring nationally. A member of the Santita Jackson Show family, Bryce Green, graduate student at Indiana University, student leader, political organizer, writer, and a correspondent for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. He was demonstrating in support of Palestinian rights, and Attorney Griggs and Reverend Dr. Wilson, Reverend Geary, and Attorney Mark Fancher, he has been banned from his campus now for 5 years. He's in the middle of his graduate program, in the midst of it. We're going to be talking about that and the price that so many of our students are paying for standing up specifically for Palestinian justice. Something for us to talk about. But first, let us talk about Marilyn Mosby's case. I certainly do have a lot of respect and admiration for Joy Reid. And so watching her show and just keeping up with the story, it was so painful to see her looking at prison time, perhaps 40 years. Now, some people say, well, she won't get 40 years. You don't know what these folks will do in this environment. You really, really don't. Because who would think that she would be on trial, that she'd be in court over her own money? Or do I have that wrong? Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, you got to help us with this. 40 years. What happened?
Well, let's go back to the genesis of it. Spring of 2015, Freddie Gray on a Sunday morning is minding his business. He sees Baltimore City police. He doesn't feel like fooling with them. He's encountered them before. So when he sees them, and they're on bicycles that morning, he runs. Because he runs, they attribute that to some sort of suspicion that causes the officers to chase Freddie Gray, tackle Freddie Gray, injure Freddie Gray, and then put him unsecured in the back of a police van, not on the seat, but they lay him on the inside and then take him on what we believe was a rough ride intentionally. He has a serious spinal cord injury, spends several days in ICU, and passes away. As a result of that, and this is as Marilyn Mosby has just been elected Baltimore City State's attorney. She reviews the evidence and makes a critical decision that changes the trajectory of how prosecutions of police officers might occur in the United States, but it ends up being kind of a line in the sand that will make her a target. She decides to prosecute the officers. And because of the way at that time the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights was written, and the way the legislation in Maryland gave significant protections to police officers, the closest she was able to come to a conviction was a mistrial, a hung jury, with the first trial, the first prosecution, which was a jury trial. After that, every other officer chose to have a bench trial. They prevailed in terms of getting the charges dismissed, or losing after having made their case. But there was a change in the tone and the tenor. But she was also then a target. She runs for reelection, is reelected to a second term, recognizing that Baltimore City had had a history of over policing some neighborhoods, particularly with broken windows policing. Right? It's kind of we're gonna we're going to charge you with anything and everything, and that's going to somehow cause us to change the trajectory of crime, violent crime in Baltimore City. She said, "I'm not doing that." As we continued to move with uh, the tolerance around cannabis, around marijuana, we found medical marijuana, and then, of course, recreational began to move through the legislature. She said, "I am not going to prosecute simple possession, right? Jamming up black folk for having a blunt or having a roach or some residue in the car." Too many times we had seen just the mere assertion by police officers that they smelled marijuana, or what they believed to be marijuana, to be sufficient for them to impose illegal searches of the persons and the property of black people. She said, "I'm not doing that." Not to mention the fact that you can't tell whether it's cannabis or whether it's marijuana or hemp, because they come from the same plant. And by the change in federal law making hemp legal, it created this whole tug of war. And so she's not getting into that. She says, "I'm not going to be jamming folks up for simple stuff." So, you know, loitering, public urination, those those kinds of just kind of baseline issues that kind of speak to, these are folks who don't necessarily have resources and means. I'm not prosecuting that. Well, that made her even more of a target. And so when COVID hits in 2020, Marilyn Mosby, who had as her own business on the side a travel company, um, she accesses her PPP money because her business has been adversely impacted because of the pandemic. She can't stand it up, can't expand it. And so when she does that, the government, the federal government, chooses to come at her. And they're coming at her for, we can all surmise what it might be, but the motivations are that she has somehow improperly accessed her PPP account, which, by the way the law was written, funds that would be accessed under this particular code are not viewed in to be the property of the person. They are the property of the government or the pension fund. And so there are certain things you have to do. So basically they were charging her with stealing what she had contributed because of the account that it was held in, and the provision under federal law that would allow someone to access it. So they charged her first with violating PPP, and then because she used the money to secure a mortgage, and there was some allegation that she and her now ex-husband, Nick Mosby, who is the current president of the Baltimore City Council running for reelection, that they had, that Marilyn Mosby had misstated, made an essential misstatement on the mortgage application, because she did not indicate that there was a federal tax lien. There was a tax issue that was unresolved. However, it was her husband that handled the taxes. She didn't know. They had had marital conversations, and he had assured her that that had been resolved. So she really didn't have the knowledge of it. She ends up going through two federal trials, first for PPP, then for the mortgage charge. She's convicted of the PPP charge, and then she's tried a second time on the mortgage charge, and they acquit her on one count, convict her on the second count. So that's kind of the short way through how we've arrived here. Now let's talk about why they came at her. There was something going on simultaneously when you had Kim Foxx in Chicago, Kim Gardner in St. Louis, you had Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, you had another sister down in Florida, and they were all bringing progressive enforcement to their tenure as elected prosecutors, exercising their prosecutorial discretion. They were all targets. As a matter of fact, prior to Marilyn Mosby's trial in Maryland, Ben Crump came to Baltimore. I hosted a press conference at my church. Ben Crump, myself, Jamal Bryant, um, Scott Bolden, who was actually representing Maryland at the time, to really highlight what was really going on. That Kim Gardner was getting pressure from the governor, basically threatening her with some sort of statewide enforcement. Marilyn Mosby was being pursued by the feds. Uh, Kim Foxx was taking heat, obviously, for Jussie Smollett and the issue there. And so you could see that this was a pattern. And so what we have now is the selective prosecution of an elected official in a context where, based on what they are using as the statutory basis to go after her, misusing PPP, here she gets a conviction when the corporations that gamed and misappropriated PPP funds, they got amnesty provided they gave the money back. That was never part of the conversation. Now, where have we seen this movie before? We need not call it out time and time again, but we know that we saw the prosecution of former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. And when they came at him in the same way, they also came after his wife, Sandy Jackson, when she was on the city council. Something about the taxes. But then you had another congressman from Illinois having the same kinds of assertions. He was given the opportunity of a non-prosecution agreement as long as he agreed to pay the money back. So what we have to really raise as the question is, why are certain Black elected officials apparently targeted by the government? And it is usually tied to changing the dynamic around how the system has treated Black people in a way that runs counter to the history of the mistreatment that has become the norm day by day. And now she is facing, potentially before a Black woman judge, the first Black woman judge on the U.S. District Court in Maryland, is now going to pass sentence on Marilyn Mosby in a few days, in a way that raises just tremendous questions. And oh, by the way, the current U.S. attorney who is ultimately responsible for the prosecution of Marilyn Mosby, because his office raised the charges, is also a Black man who was in the state legislature with Marilyn Mosby's husband before he became president of the city council. And so we have to look at the curious pressure that is placed on Black elected officials to take certain positions against other Black elected officials for trying to make the system more fair to the interest of Black people, over and against the pressures of those who might have political sway because of contributions or because of other interests. Marilyn Mosby, I think all would agree, if you were to have a conversation, some of them would not say it on a recorded line or on a camera, but everybody's got to know that based on what has been alleged and what was actually charged, this was more persecution instead of prosecution.
Gerald Griggs, I want you to respond to that, because I can say, to fully disclose to the audience, if they do not know already, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. is my brother. And when we became aware, his family, of what was going on, we said, well, can we repay the money? And they said no. He had also achieved seniority. I think he was about to, if the Democrats won, head a major committee around banking. He was also the number one opponent, the number one candidate to become mayor of Chicago. But he's not alone. This happens all the time. I think we and it's not President Gregg's people who support empire, if you will. They go after the people who support the people, the populace. It just seems like it's a pattern, or maybe I'm misreading this, Attorney Griggs.
Well, sometimes in politics, when you represent the voice of the voiceless, you become targeted. And so, I got a chance to meet Attorney Mosley a few years ago when she came down to Georgia to support some of the progressive prosecutors in Georgia, Sherry Boston and a few others. And so I always found her a very thoughtful and a very supportive of the community type of attorney and prosecutor. And then I got to spend more time with her when we were up in Baltimore for the NAACP convention. We had an opportunity to sit down for about an hour and just talk about our philosophies in the law. So I know her very well. I was shocked to hear about the charges and was hopeful that she would be successful in her 2 federal trials, and was disheartened when she was not successful. And whatever the allegations now proven crimes, she is a first offender. And I believe in the rehabilitation of the system, so there should not be any prison time for her. What should happen is, and I saw some of the Joy Reid interview and talking about what she's going through, and knowing the type of person that she is, I think this is an opportunity for the president to step in and pardon her. Because again, she had a stellar career as an attorney. She had a stellar career as a prosecutor. She was targeted, for the things that she was trying to do as a progressive prosecutor with police reform and criminal justice reform. And so I think she became a target of the police unions and others who want to send a message that we do not want the system, meaning the criminal justice system, to change, and we want it to continue to target. So, just like the prosecutor in Chicago and the prosecutor in St. Louis, and now the targeting of the prosecutor here in Fulton County, Georgia, we're seeing a rash around the country of when African Americans or people who believe in the rehabilitative function of the criminal justice system step up and take these roles as prosecutors. And we see, with an eye towards prosecutorial discretion, a targeting and a changing of the rules. Again, here in Fulton County and all over Georgia, there are new progressive prosecutors, and now there's a passage of a law to create a commission to rein in the power of the prosecutor here in Georgia. So my heart goes out to her. My hope is that the president of the United States will hear directly from the people. I see a social media campaign that's building to get the president to pardon her. But based on what she was convicted of and her lack of any substantial criminal history, because again, to be a member of the bar, you most of the time don't have any prior criminal history or criminal convictions. I think this is a case where either the judge needs to show leniency under the federal guidelines, or the president of the United States needs to pardon her because she's, one, an asset to her community, but two, this is seeming like a political persecution more than a prosecution with any victim. So I think it's a victimless crime that's been now a conviction. And I think that something needs to happen to protect her voice and to show that the system really is changing and not weaponizing.
What do you think that the president is inclined to pardon? I mean, or would he need pressure?
I think he needs pressure. I'm not sure that he fully appreciates what's happening. I'm glad that individuals like Joy Reid and Angela Rye and others are using their platform to elevate this case, because outside of Maryland, many jurisdictions didn't even know that she had been convicted and now facing sentencing. I've only found out when I saw it on Angela Rye's platform, and then I saw the Joy Reid story. So I think that we need to continue to elevate the call. She's done so much, not just for the city of Baltimore, but for other jurisdictions. Like I said, she's been to Atlanta multiple times to support progressive prosecutors in Georgia. She's done other things in the community that necessitate us raising our voice. And so I would join in the call for the President of the United States to pardon her, because I think that the purpose of the criminal justice system is not just to punish someone, but to rehabilitate them. And I think that, you know, she does not need to go to an incarcerate into a federal prison. I don't think it would serve any purpose other than political retribution.
Keith Lamar, attorney Keith Lamar, you were the national president of the Black prosecutors. Indeed, you have your own practice now where you really help people with their auto and trucking accidents. A lot of our independent businesses have to come to you when they have challenges. What do you make of this? Because we're seeing there's a pattern here.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being on the show. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the platform. I got a chance to meet Ms. Mosby when she came down to Atlanta, as Attorney Griggs stated. Very, very intelligent lady. She has some great ideas for our community. I hope that some of those ideas can also be implemented. She had a great vision. And I do agree. You know, I've been a prosecutor majority of my legal career. I'm not doing that now, but I think that this is a little bit overkill. At the end of the day, looking up to 40 years, I think she should have no time in jail. I think that this is a oversight that could have been fixed without any kind of trial. I'm not sure what the actual offer was before she went to trial, but I think this is excessive. And I have to agree with you, Attorney Griggs. I think they're persecuting her. She came after the cops, and I know that the cops are, I think the same person that she was trying to prosecute in regards to that case is now over the police as far as going through what's the right way to behave as an officer, right? That's kind of a slap in the face to me. But at the end of the day, I hope that the community does support her. You have a leader in her. And that's what happens when you have leaders in this world. They're going to get attacked. And so when the leaders get attacked, you need people that stand up behind them and understand what they're trying to do. And so I think that she was trying to do the right thing. She used her own retirement funds. So at the end of the day, I think this is an overkill. I hate that she's going through it, but I hope that the community supports her. I support her and that she can overcome this.
Because I can't shake that this is her money. You know, because even in Congressman Jackson's case, the money that you raise, when you retire, it's yours. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's a lot of gamesmanship, you know, just given what is this, Attorney Fancher?
Well, you know, I think that more generally, Black elected officials have a very curious relationship with the capitalist system. On the one hand, the system benefits from having them in the positions that they're in because they represent an affirmation of the legitimacy of the electoral process and affirms for those who might want to challenge the process itself or to overthrow the system. You know, it affirms the validity of it, the legitimacy of it. And so for that reason, there is a motivation to, in some way and on some level, ensure their protection, to make sure that they don't have trouble so that other people will continue to buy into the charade that is the electoral process that we have in this country. But on the other hand, there are individual Black elected officials who honestly believe that their positions present them with an opportunity for reform, and sometimes their pursuit of reform threatens some of the most vital interests of the capitalist system. And it is at that point when the system tends to move against them. And sometimes it moves against them even when the system perceives that they might become progressive in their work, that they might begin to do things that are in some way threatening to the interests of those who have power in this society. So those are the dynamics that confront any Black elected official. And I think over time, we've seen the disproportionate prosecution of Black elected officials generally. But then when you come to prosecutors, then the situation becomes even more complicated because they're not just elected officials, but they're also part of, and of speaking very broadly, the law enforcement community. And that brings with it its own dynamics. It is a cesspool. It is a criminal enterprise in many respects. And even though prosecutors are not technically part of the police department or law enforcement agencies, their work is so closely aligned with what they do it so directly impacts what goes on in police work that they become subject to the same types of treatment that anybody in law enforcement would be subject to if they choose to rock the boat too much. And so when people talk about the blue wall of silence, that's real. When they talk about police corruption and police racism, we know all of that is real. And we know that retaliation is real. I just concluded a trial, some months ago on behalf of a Black police officer who, while off duty and in plain clothes, stumbled onto an unmarked crime scene and was attacked and humiliated and berated by fellow police officers who did not know that he was an officer right away. And then when they found out that he was an officer, the supervisor told him that he better not report it, that he better not say anything about it, or he would face consequences for it. He did file a complaint against it, and Internal Affairs began to investigate him. They brought charges against him. He ended up suing, claiming retaliation. A jury was able to see it, and we won. But the cost to him personally and emotionally was beyond anything that the jury was able to award for him. And that's the kind of pressure that he faced as a police officer. Imagine the kinds of pressures that are brought to bear on Black prosecutors who have infinitely more authority, have infinitely more opportunities to impact police and their reality, and who are likely to become, if they don't definitely become, the targets of police unions and the other reactionary forces in the law enforcement world, who really don't want to see their culture in any way impacted, their way of doing things impacted in any way. They like racial profiling. They like beating up Black people. They like framing Black people. They love that kind of thing. They live for that. And if you have someone who comes up and starts threatening it or challenging it, then they've got to go. And they pull no punches, and they do what they have to do. So none of this should come as a surprise. The only cautionary note that I'll sound for any Black elected official, whether they're prosecutors or not, is that you know this going into it, and you can't become seduced by the presumed power that you have, the presumed authority that you have. Just because you see white guys get away with all kinds of things, just because you see them carry themselves with a certain degree of arrogance, just because you see them do all kinds of things that give them free rein to exercise and to act on whatever whims they have, it doesn't mean that you can, or at least not in the same way, because they're always looking at you. They're always circling around you, looking for you to slip up or to do anything that may not even be an infraction or a crime or offense. But if they can twist it into that, then they certainly will.
Reverend Jeanette Wilson. I mean, Attorney Griggs, and Attorney Lamar, you know Fonnie Willis. We see what she's having to endure. Reverend Dr. Urey, you know Kim Fox, and you know Fonnie Willis. I mean, you know we everybody on this panel knows some of everybody here who are in these crosshairs. It seems like there's a playbook, Reverend Wilson.
Well, yeah, there is a playbook, and I don't want to assume guilt, first of all. Even though she was found guilty, I don't know, Dr. Urey would know if she filed an appeal, and we really should have pushed her. And now we have to figure out how do we keep her from jail, but I don't want her record to indicate that she's guilty of any kind of malfeasance. As Dr. Urey indicated, they started targeting her up front before she did anything or appeared to do anything, before this case was even imagined. And so I would hope that we would not assume that she did anything wrong. Anytime you can have a former sitting president saying and doing what a former sitting president has done, and they haven't even charged him with anything, really. With he has violated. I mean, he has participated in treasonous activities, and had he not been enjoying the white privilege, it would be a different state of affairs. And so, I want us to really look at what law did she violate, if any, and what are her defenses. And we have to lift her up because she can't fight for herself. We can fight for her. And every one of these prosecutors, at the time she was a prosecutor, there were 6 Black state's attorneys around the country. All of them have been under attack, all of them. And so the idea to say that, well, you're under scrutiny, therefore you do nothing, that's assuming she did something wrong. I'm suggesting to you, and the women catch it doubly because they have husbands that set them up. And y'all can say amen or not, I don't care. It happened with Kim Fox. Her husband called the police on her. It happened here with Marilyn Mosby. That's the elephant in the room. So you are fighting inside and outside. That's very difficult to do. Say amen, y'all. I'm gonna ask you one more time.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
I want the brothers.
I mean, no, I will.
We need to look at that, Santita, because
I will say in all of these cases, it's been very painful.
It's very painful
to watch someone's internal issues spill outside.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's very painful. That's
extremely painful. And so did they file a joint tax return that she just you being the prosecutor, your husband who has letting him fill out stuff, and now you're getting a divorce? Because I can tell. Well, I'm not going to even get into that. But what I can say is this.
Thank you.
What I can say is this: we have to look at the totality of the circumstances. That's number one. Number two, I don't know Maryland law, but I would submit to you that I don't believe that Marilyn Mosby intentionally violated any law. Now, as Dr. Yuri kept saying, they had a plan to set her up to get her over from the day she was installed in that office up until she was charged. They watched everything she did. And as you would say, Dr. Attorney Fincher, well, she should have paid attention. I suspect she did as best she could, working almost 23 hours a day as a prosecutor with all these heater cases coming on her watch. And so what do we do as those of us who practice civil rights law? How do we help her?
Well,
that's the question that we should be
my question for you, Gerald Griggs, you're the president of the NAACP in Georgia. This is our most vaunted civil rights organization, and you're the legal arm of the civil rights movement. We take the streets and do the research. Y'all go to court. What does she have any recourse? I mean, what
did she file an appeal? Recourse? Did she, Dr. Yuri?
Well, the appeal cannot actually be filed until the sentence is in, because the trial matter is still open until the judge gives disposition. I would imagine that the federal public defender, which she had a federal public defender, they came at her for trying to raise money. She and her husband had a defense fund, so they came at that. But we are anticipating that there are appealable issues that will be raised. The question is, what does that look like? And until we know what the sentence looks like, that too could be part of the appeal if the sentence comes in harsher than one would expect based on whatever's in the pre-sentence investigation.
But let me ask President Griggs this. Hold on, because to me, we're still fighting the civil rights space. We're still fighting racism. We're still fighting being set up. We're still fighting when Reverend Leon Sullivan, who many of us knew and loved and honored, he talked about civil rights. He said, we got our civil rights. Now we need civil rights. If you go to the Woolworth counter, that's great. I'm glad you can sit there. But if you don't have any money, you have no civil rights. We've got to get economically, we need our piece of the pie. But we're seeing that once we get into these powerful positions, Attorney Griggs, It's a whole different fight, and it's a different kind of fight for blacks and women, and certainly if you are a progressive, if you decide that you are going to sell black people and poor people and the vulnerable up the river, you get protected for a while.
So so I think this is the point, and this is again why I think it's been brilliant that they've taken this to social media so that more people outside of the state of Maryland can fully understand what's going on. The first thing that's shocking to me is a lawyer of her caliber. I love public defenders. I was one. But a case of this level requires the best legal minds that money can buy.
Yes.
And what I would say is, I'm trying to figure out why there weren't Maryland lawyers lining up to defend her pro bono. Because I know in Georgia,
Mhm.
there are civil rights lawyers and there are criminal defense attorneys who at least would have donated their services. Gactel, Gate City Bar Association, the Georgia Association of Black Women Lawyers, they would have lined up behind Marilyn to defend her. So my first question is, when is the sentencing, and have we already applied for a bond based on the sentencing, so she can get a post conviction bond to stay out? And
Well, okay.
then we
No,
need
explain that.
so basically, after you've been convicted and you've been sentenced, you can be given an appeal bond, both on the state level, which is not a state level case, but a federal case, to stay out while the appeal is pending. And of course, those are very rare. But when you have the level of support that she should be getting from the community, it would appear that she would qualify for something like that. So that's the first step. The next step is they need to, like I said, appeal to the Court of Appeals. And I'm not sure which circuit that is. We're in Georgia, so we're in the 11th Circuit. But whatever circuit that is, and start building that pressure, not only from a legal strategy, but from a PR strategy, to make sure that this injustice does not continue, with an eye towards this going to the Supreme Court. And so there are so many things that could be going on. I agree. We have our civil rights. We got to have our civil rights, but we also have to realize that we are not in the day of Thurgood. There are thousands of Thurgoods now.
Yes.
And my question is, where are they? Because in that same city, there was a university, I believe it's called Howard University. There was a law school there, and there was a great professor there. His name was Charles Hamilton Houston. He was the first graduate, one of the first graduates of Harvard Law. And he said, a lawyer is one of two things: either a social engineer or a parasite. Now, we need our social engineers to step up for our sister Marilyn, so she doesn't have to go through these things. And there are so many great lawyers. I know so many great lawyers in the state of Maryland, one of which is a good friend of mine, Billy Murphy. I would be wondering where these lawyers are in this particular case, because this is one of those cases where sometimes you put the billable hours away and you just do it, or you can get a GoFundMe not in her name and raise the legal funds some other way. There are organizations that can raise the legal funds some other way, but we need to actually put those great educations that we have, those great litigation skills that we have in place for this young lady, because she did so much for the community. So that's my question. As a Georgia State Conference president, I wish there was something I could do, but I'm not the Maryland State Conference president. So I probably will get on the phone after I get off of this show and have a conversation. But something needs to happen, because, we can't allow just something to happen just because we're saying, well, we don't know if she did. That doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
What matters
So here's where I think we gotta, and the points are well taken, but it's important to know the history of how she arrived at having a federal public defender.
Please.
There are a couple of names that have been mentioned. Billy Murphy amongst them. He's not just an attorney. He's also a former circuit court judge in Baltimore City. He knows the system and has those relationships. President Kobe Little, who is the state conference president in Maryland now, he was in the courtroom. So we've seen this. Here's what happened. Scott Bolden was Marilyn Mosby's first defense attorney. There was actually a tiff, an actual issue, where the sitting judge in Maryland's case um, actually made some misconduct charges against Scott about a filing of a document because Scott is outside of the venue, the jurisdiction. He is admitted before the U.S. District Court. He pro-hocked in. There were local counsel to kind of keep him anchored in the case, and somewhere along the line in the moving of paper, something happened. That actually disrupted the flow. Then they came after the ability to make sure we could keep her counsel in. The way we were doing it was to make sure that because she was a sitting state's attorney when the indictment came down, pro bono for a public official was going to be problematic. So we had to figure out what's the angle to make sure that she's got representation as the case moves. As it then begins to move, then you had venue issues. They tried to disrupt her ability to go through her primary. They made a tactical decision to defer and delay the first trial until after the primary was over. All that did was open the floodgates for her to take all kinds of political shots when she was trying to hold on to her seat, and then she had to ride out the rest of her term. At the same time, they were also, through the IRS, the tax guy, right, looking at their joint tax returns. Now, part of it, we understand that they will use your tax returns for whatever they can. Most of the time, it's not to help you. If the IRS, and there's some investigation, they're going to look to see can they infer that there could be something that they're going to charge. So I would just suggest that other than trying to replay the entire trajectory of how we ended up with an indictment at all, after almost a couple of years of investigation, that there is an opportunity to have a conversation. Now, I've been in rooms.
We've
muted.
lost you, Reverend
Muted.
Gary. We lost you. We lost your volume.
He's still talking.
Okay, I know.
Yeah, he's
But
muted.
hold on one moment. Let me pivot to you, Attorney Lamar, because you've been the president, the national president of Black prosecutors. So, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting, say about, oh goodness, I can't believe Johnny Cochran. He said he became a prosecutor so he could understand the system from that space, so then he could come out and defend you. And so many of you have approached law that way because you understand that we're behind the eight ball. And I would like to pass this around to everybody, but let me start with you because you've headed that body. Is there anything, I mean, because she's being prosecuted, persecuted. Can you get a group of people together? I mean, because let me tell you, everybody else, and I'm not saying you do it. My mother and father wouldn't let you say, well, so-and-so did it next door. They would, no. I'm saying people who make it. When you look at Jewish people, they do like this. I have a friend, and you remember Danny Schechter, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, who was an Emmy Award-winning television producer.
Yes.
Whose politics were to the left of Bernie Sanders. I mean, he was, his make your eyes get real big, Attorney Griggs, but that was Danny's. Those were his politics. Wonderful guy. He said many of the mainstream organizations that were Jewish were far to the right of him. He said, but I am Jewish, so I've got to contribute to them because they take care of me. I know I need an advocate. Attorney Lamar, we need advocates.
I agree. I think that Attorney Griggs said something earlier. In all of Maryland, DC, and DC being one of those meccas, right, for Black people.
Yeah.
The fact that she had to go through a public defender, I was surprised to see it. I looked at it like, what's going on? I understand that she's a state's attorney. And for those that don't understand, government attorneys don't really make the most money. But at the end of the day, I thought that she would have had it better than a public defender for such a big deal. And I agree. If this would have happened down here in Georgia, I think somebody would have came to the rescue as far as representation would have been concerned. All right, pro bono is something that we all do. I think it should be it's pretty much a thing that we have to do at this point. That's how I feel about it. You have to do it. And I'm not barred in that state, but I know a lot of good attorneys in Maryland, good attorneys in DC, Virginia, the whole little metro area they have there that should have represented her. So when I look at this, I really feel I'm a little disturbed by it. I feel like she was just left on an island by herself.
And I think it's politically, Attorney Fincher, that's a horrible look for Black people. That someone who went all the way out there on that limb for her people was left out there by herself.
Well, it is, but I also want to clarify something I said earlier about uh, Black prosecutors being mindful of what they can and cannot do. I don't say that with an expectation or a belief that they can avoid trouble by being careful. I don't know what Marilyn Mosby went through, and she may have been as careful as she could be. But I think that it's just like, I can't remember if it's Huey Newton or Bobby Seale who said that a revolutionary is a doomed man. That anybody who enters into electoral politics with an idea that they're going to try and create revolution or even extreme progressive change, they're doomed. That's just a reality. And I think that our collective expectations have to be managed in that sense. We can't believe that prosecutors are going to be able to do progressive things and not face consequences for them. When they're elected, all the things that we're talking about now in terms of broad community support and mobilizing defenses and all of that, that has to start then. Because it's certain that if they're going to go down a progressive road, that they're going to face it. The culture in law enforcement is real. People frequently say that, well, in order to remedy the problems that we have with police, we need to have more Black police officers. And no, we don't. It doesn't matter. Whether they're Black, red, green, or blue, the police culture, the police dynamic, institutional dynamic is so strong that either you go with the flow of how law enforcement is supposed to go, or they will chew you up and spit you out. And that applies to prosecutors too. It applies to anybody, a president of the United States who decides that, well, I'm going to be an anti-imperialist president. They will assassinate you. So these are just political realities that I think that we have to keep in mind. If we want revolution, we can't expect that we're going to vote our way to revolution. That has to happen otherwise. If we want to strategically use the electoral process and people who have elected positions to try and advance the revolution to some degree, to move us in a progressive direction, that's a different thing. That's a strategic question. But we have to understand that when we get into those arenas, when we start occupying those positions, we are doomed.
You know what? I only have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I want everyone to give me a minute, because I think of Governor George Ryan here in Illinois when he halted the executions. Reverend Wilson, Gerald Briggs, y'all. That day I was living in New York. It was so momentous. They carried it live everywhere. We said he's going to prison. I mean, I had several friends who called me immediately. They were like, "Girl, he's going to jail." I said, "Oh, they're gonna find something." And did they not send that elderly white man to prison? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Because he said, I'm not going to chance killing someone else who's innocent. I won't have it. I'm not going to do it. 1 minute for you, Reverend Wilson. Where do we go from here?
Well, since I'm the only woman, I asked for 2 minutes. But however,
I can't give it to you.
where we go from here is we cannot give up. And the idea, it's not a fait accompli. If that were the case, we never would have ended slavery because we didn't have the upper hand then. And I believe that we need to marshal all of our forces. There are lawyers around this country. You got a law school at Howard that can help do some research. I think we owe her that, and we have the power. We got the Legal Defense Fund. We need to call them. We need to call all of the lawyers who practice in federal court, who know how to do this, who can bolster what they're doing in Baltimore. She should not be. And then we can also promote this in all of our media outlets. What's happening to Marilyn Mosby? We supported her when she ran. We want to support her now. I don't believe she's guilty. I do believe, Reverend Attorney Fincher, yes, she's a target, like all of us are targets. We fight together, we win. We fight alone, we lose.
I don't think you would disagree with that. I mean, I think that many people I've spoken with have lamented the fact, Attorney Lamar, that this happened to her. And I said, honey, this comes with the territory. When you decide to do this work, The knives are coming, and guess what? They didn't get Reverend Jackson, so they went after his son and his children. That's how that works. And you have to understand that. And you have to be ready for it. We cannot afford for you to sit at home. I don't care where you practice law. Everybody has something on this fight for Marilyn Mosby. I don't care where you practice law. You can practice in Alaska for all I care. So we need to come to her aid. She needs our support. What do you suggest that we do, Attorney Lamar?
Well, once again, thank you for having us on the show. I think that honestly, awareness needs to be brought out to our whole community. I think an understanding needs to be happening. Because at the end of the day, I agree with what Attorney Fancher said. When you decide that you want to be a leader, it's hard being a leader. It's hard being to take a mantle and do something that's against the grain. But you must be willing to understand that this is going to happen. And the people that you are trying to lead must support you even when you are at your lowest moment. So leaders are always out here leading and trying to be joyful and trying to motivate those to do better. But every now and then we might fall too. And when we fall, we need our community to stand behind us and not turn our back on us so quickly, because those same people are the ones that was trying to do something great for you. And I hope that people realize what she was trying to achieve, what she's trying to accomplish. And now they've got this thing they're throwing at her. But at the end of the day, if the people do not leave her side, she can always overcome it. So I just pray that the people that are listening to this, the people out here in our communities, do not turn their back on their leaders, because our leaders are who we need. And it takes a strong person to go against the grain. So hopefully, I definitely don't believe that she's have any jail time. To throw that out there one more time, there should be 0 jail time for this. But I want to let sure that the people don't understand that do not turn your back on your leaders out here. We need you. And in order for us to be the greatest leader that we can be, you got to support us even in our tough moments.
Even as we're human. 1 minute for you, Attorney Fancher.
No, I just second all of that. I think that the only thing I just caution us to do is just be aware. We got to always be supporting ourselves, support our leaders, and she compounding what she did substantively was her style, which I found very exciting. I mean, that just the posture that she assumed, and I know that her enemies were deeply offended by it. Somebody who stands up boldly and speaks strongly and without fear. That's not an image that they wanted to see, in addition to what she was doing substantively. So we just got to know next time we got to be ready even before the charges are brought.
And Attorney Griggs, everybody has to jump in and see it as our collective fight. Nobody is out here by themselves. And if you want perfection, everybody, you be perfect. God doesn't use perfect people, because ain't nobody down here perfect. God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Absolutely. And that's what I see with her, even with whatever she was going through at home. Honey, you have to smile through your tears. I remember when Michael Dukakis' wife went into rehab in the last weeks of the campaign. Those of us who had campaigned together for a year knew what was going on with her. And your heart went out to her, because you saw those of us behind the scenes who were running saw her struggling with alcoholism through the whole campaign. You weren't pulling for her. You were, and even then you were pulling for her to make it. And I could only imagine that even then her husband kept running. And I had to respect that, because that's just being human. So what do you suggest? Where do we go from here, Attorney Gray?
I think that people need to recognize the fierce urgency of right now for Marilyn's case, use their platforms to elevate it, and those that have skills to bring those skills to bear. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Now it's time to act like it. We can't sit back and say, oh, we knew she was going to be targeted, so we just need to sit back and let it happen. That's not our generation. And so what I would say is everybody that has earned these talents because of the work of their ancestors, it's time to pay it back. And so regardless of what they say she did or what they prove she did or whatever happened, it's time for us to use these skills that we have. And by we, I mean the Black lawyers in that state. It's time for us to use those gifts that we have to give back. And for those who aren't in that state, it's time for us to use our platforms to elevate the call for justice for Marilyn. So I know I am going to do that. And I would call on anybody else to do it as well. I do understand it takes a lot to get things out of certain states. So we got to use the platforms that we have, to get it out, to make sure people are aware, raise the awareness, and then do what's right. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to try to reach out to her. I don't know if I have her correct number anymore, but we need to do something immediately.
Okay, well, we can find that. And I know Reverend Yuri can do that. Reverend Yuri, the last minute belongs to you.
I want to be real clear that as you see Marilyn talk about her upcoming sentencing, this is not a sentencing that is ill-informed and absent of some of the participation that we say we would expect. There are a number of conversations that, one, I don't think any of us would feel it would be proper to talk about kind of inside baseball, but I think you can expect that Marilyn has a voice, and she's using that voice, and she's also very clear about the decisions that were made that got her here. A number of those are kind of very, very personal. But we also have to understand that this ain't over with Marilyn. There is every intent. Just stand by that, because it wasn't just she became a target, they became a target. They were the next Black political elite, not just for Baltimore, but in many ways up and coming nationally. He led the legislative body, still leads the legislative body, and she was the state's attorney. So that's one. But two, as lawyers, having all lawyers on here, we understand also process. The process isn't fair. It wasn't designed to be fair. The process protects the system and the institutional powers. And so just kind of stay tuned. I think you'll see some things, but I do know that there are a number of things, and we can have the conversations offline. I'm happy to have them, that will give a more informed position, other than pointing out the fact that, as one of the lead prosecutors that led this case, who taught civil procedure and told us in class one night, the government knows that everybody does something that it could consider criminal every day. They're
Mm-hmm.
just selective about who they go after. It's a selective prosecution. We know it to be so. And so I agree that we should all be ready to step in and do what we can. But we think a lot of that conversation has to start with understanding what is Marilyn's posture, because she is actually guiding this whole process. And the Billy Murphys of the world have been in those conversations, along with many of the others. It's just not something that we should publicize, because, as we often hear, those who know don't tell, and those who tell very often don't know.
Second hour of the Santita Jackson Show coming up. Let's look at the crackdowns, the persecutions, if you will, of these students who are protesting for the people of Palestine, and who are calling for a ceasefire and looking for peace in the Middle East and justice. That's more of that in the Santita